Hello and welcome to this next iMesh video. So recently I have been making a few videos about relatively simple topics, but I tried to take these topics to the next level and try to teach you something extra about this specific topic. So I did one video about the 3D cursor and trying to change the Blender axis inside of Blender using the 3D cursor, to showing you how to duplicate properly inside of Blender and how to use collections properly inside of Blender. And I've been getting an overwhelming amount of comments from users saying that they have learned so much from these videos, so I've decided to keep this train going with the next simple yet not so simple tool. And this tool I use almost for every single model that I create. And that is the Mirror Modifier. So you're probably thinking, oh, I know everything about the Mirror Modifier, but in the traditional fashion of these previous videos that I've created, there might be a good chance that I'm going to teach you something which you didn't know. So I recommend just watching the video, finding out some new things about the Mirror Modifier, and maybe take your 3D modeling to the next level. So I'm getting a lot of new viewers to this channel, so I quickly just need to say that the balls are not real, and the whole background is not real. So I made a video about how I created this backdrop. So I'm gonna try to remember to put the link in the description or something, or in the corner. But no, it's 100% CGI. Okay, and this video is brought to you by iMesh. Of course, it's brought to you by us, and we don't have any ads on this channel, but if you're looking to make some money in architectural visualization, or you're curious about ArcViz, or just want to build a portfolio, then do check us out. We have 1,450-ish assets, and our active subscriptions get an additional 360 assets released throughout the year. And all of our models are made in-house, so we can quality control everything that we release, which I know is a big problem on some of the marketplaces where every man and his dog can upload models of varying quality for varying prices, and it's very hard to gauge what is actually going to be a good model before you buy it. So check out iMesh, it's a great place to start, and we can basically kickstart your career with most of the assets that you'll need to get started. Okay, so the Mirror Modifier is one of my favorites, and I'm going to go over some key concepts and then go into some more high level stuff and hopefully teach you something new. If I don't teach you something new, hopefully it's just a nice refresher for you to remind you to use some of these cool things that it can do. So to get started, the Mirror Modifier will always try to mirror based on the origin point of the object. And the origin point is this yellow dot here, which can be turned on and off through the overlays. So when you add a Mirror Modifier, it's going to be trying to do it based on that point. So if I go and add a Mirror Modifier now, nothing will appear to have happened because the origin point is directly in the center of this cube, which is 100% symmetrical. So nothing appears to be happening. Whereas if we want to move the origin point, so let's put this point over here with shift right click and then go to object, set origin to 3D cursor, we can then see now that the object is mirrored because the origin point is outside of the object. And now if we go back into tab mode, we can then also move this closer. And now we can see that it's mirroring based on that point. So if we go back to where it was, and then we can go to tab and move that out as well. And currently it's mirroring on the x-axis. So we can see here, the x-axis runs across here. So if we also mirror on the y-axis, nothing is happening because the cube is now, based on the origin point, 100% symmetrical down this line. So if we move it in the edit mode with tab, G, Y on the y-axis, we can now see that it's now mirroring on both, and the same goes for the z-axis. We have to move it so it's like that. So if nothing appears to be happening and you have a symmetrical object, maybe the origin point is in the wrong place, but always remember it's based on the origin point. Okay, so a common use case with Blender and the Mirror Modifier is that you're just working on half an object. You might often just have it split already and the origin point is directly in the center of this split, and then you enable the Mirror Modifier, so then you can visually concentrate on one side and then the other side is just going to be copying the exact same thing. So you might be working on a chest of drawers like this, and you can inset this face, and we just delete that one that's created, and then we have a shape that is going to be exactly the same either side. Now if you are working on a shape, and a common thing that you might want to do is inset, and you press I on a face and it insets the face, you want it to take into consideration the Mirror Modifier. So what you can turn off is boundary, and that should work in most cases. So we can see that that is the edge of an object, so it won't consider that as part of the inset part. So now if we were then to extrude, we can then see that it extrudes perfectly, rather than if it did it the other way where you're left with the inset from the middle. Okay, so another really cool thing about the mirror modifier, and that is the clipping button. And what that does is if I move this over here, if with this disabled and move it back into this object, we can see that it's overlapping, or if this was centered, then we move it away, we now have a gap. But if you enable clipping, you can move this over and this center point won't go past the mirroring point. And if we go to the center and click, and then we try to move it away again, we can then see that it's now stuck. So if you're working on a shape, I feel like the clipping should be enabled automatically because it's very helpful that if you're working on a shape and you move something over, it is still going to stay joined at the middle and you're not going to accidentally move it away. But I would just remind you that if, for example, you add a sphere or another object, and this is now with clipping enabled, you try to move it away and it's not going to let you. So you're going to have to make sure you turn that off, move it away, and then enable it again. And I feel like that's the most common thing that happens to me when I'm using the clipping modifier. Okay, and the next thing that we have is the merge. And if I have this shape here, and then I just increase the merge point, it's going to eventually try to merge onto this object based on the merge point. So if I have this here, move this closer, at some point it's going to merge, which is also very, very helpful. But one thing I would be careful of if you're working on the merge is that if you're working on geometry which is too close, so if we move this over here and move this one too close, we can then see that the merge is going to merge those points too, whereas we might want those points. So if I apply that now, they're going to be gone. So just make sure that this is quite a low point. I think 0.0001 is usually fine. And that will merge right at the very last second, or enable clipping and you can make sure that everything's merged correctly. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is actually the mirror object. So traditionally Blender will try to mirror the object based on the origin point. So this yellow point on the object. So currently it's going to be mirroring from that place. But you might want to use another object as the mirror object, which can be very helpful in the certain use cases, which I'll go over shortly. But basically how it works is, if I go Shift A and add an empty, it can work with any object, but usually it's easier with an empty because it also doesn't add any geometry to the scene, and it also won't render. If I click on the mirror object and click on this, and then click on the mirror on the empty, we can then see that if I move this empty, the object is then going to be mirrored from this point. If I was to rotate it as well, let's say rotate 45 degrees, we can then see that it's mirroring, but it's no longer mirroring on just the X, Y, and Z axis. It's going to be mirroring based on the rotation of this object here. Right, and now let's talk about the next tool, and that is actually using the, let's add Suzanne again, and let's just apply that. So let's just say we have a mirror modifier, but we don't want to split this object in half. There's too much geometry and I'm trying to figure out where to make the cut so that it mirrors properly and there's no overlapping faces. But there is a tool inside of the mirror modifier which would do the cut for you, that is called Bisect. Now nothing appears to have happened, but if I go into this object and was to change one side, we can see nothing happens, whereas if we change the other side, things are happening. So what this bisect is doing is already cutting the object for you. So if we move this shape over here, we can see the outline of where the shape used to be, because that side is not being mirrored. It's going to be this side which is mirrored. But let's say we want to mirror the other side, we can then flip it. So now we can see that it's now taking into consideration this side as the mirror side. So if we move this over here like this, we can then see we're left with this object. Whereas if we then flip this back, we can then see that it's taking into consideration the other side. The same can be said for the y-axis. So we can see that we're going to get some overlapping faces here. So if I move this over here, and if I was just to apply that, for example, we then have loads of faces in the middle, but we don't want these faces. So let's go back and then let's make sure that we enable bisect. But we can see that it's bisecting the wrong side. So let's click flip and then we can apply, and then we are left with this shape and there's nothing inside this object. So it's going to do a nice clean cut for you. Now that is very helpful. That might be a little bit complicated to get your head around. So I'm just going to do a common use case, especially in architectural visualization. You might be working on a window and you see this model that you like, but it's not quite right. So let's append that one in. Okay, so we appended this object in, but we can see that what we actually want from this model is we only want this door section like this side, and we don't want this side. So what you might be inclined to do would be to go into the object, try to delete all of these faces, and then maybe try to, I don't know, select this window because you don't want it and delete it, then select these faces and try to merge these perhaps, but then you're left with this overlap and it's not quite right and it's just getting a little bit higgledy-piggledy. But the mirror modifier can do this for you. So if we add the mirror modifier and click that button, it's now mirroring both sides equally. So if we rotate that, we can see that both sides are being mirrored, just like as you'd imagine from the origin point. Now if we were to hit bisect, we can see that it's now mirroring and cutting the object for you. But we can see that there is this little thing in the middle here. So what I'm going to do is that you can go into edit mode and slide this over if you want to, and then it's going to cut that for you. But because we have a door here and this door is already in the right place, what I'm going to do is select this object. I'm going to do Shift S, cursor to selected, and then I'm going to add an empty object. And then I'm going to click mirror modifier and click on the empty object. And now it's going to be mirroring based on that object here. Okay, I might need to actually now flip that. For some reason it flipped. So just click flip, and this is almost where we want it to be. Let's bring back the door and let's click on this object here and then just bring this all the way in where we want it to be. There we go. Now if we apply that, we can just delete these pieces here which are no longer needed. And there we go, we now have the door just as we wanted. So now we just have one door, we no longer have a window, and there's just gonna be a perfect cut through the middle because it's bisecting and doing the cut for you. And this is one thing which I don't really see people doing, especially for windows and things like this. In ArcViz, the amount of times where a client says, I have this window from the plans, can you make that work? Chances are you're not gonna have that window, but you're probably going to have a composite from many different things which might actually be the window which you're looking for. And now that leads me on to the next point, is how the hell do you create something like this? And as we have made well over 1,000 models now for iMesh, this shape has come up a few times, and how the hell do you make it? So of course I know that there is, you can go to mesh and click on pipes and you can add these pipes which are already done for you, but how do you model something like this? How do you make it so that you have this shape here? Let's just disable this. How do you make it so that these cylinders join perfectly? And joining cylinders is actually a common thing which happens in Blender modeling. So I'm going to show you how to do that now using just the mirror modifier, and then take that to the next level to make it look like the thumbnail which I have, and probably one of the reasons why you clicked. So let's just delete that, and then let's add a cylinder. Let's just Shift Z to make it a bit thinner, and let's bring this up. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is add a mirror modifier. Surprise, surprise. Let's click on mirror modifier, and we can see now that the object, when you're in edit mode, is going to be mirroring based on this point. Now what I'm going to do is rotate it on the Y-axis by 45 degrees, and we can see that it's mirroring on both sides, but we want to just mirror on one side, so let's just apply that here. And now we have the start of the shape, so let's just apply that. Actually, let's just rotate this 45 degrees now so it's nice and even, and then let's make sure you apply the rotation. Okay, the next thing I want to do is actually add another mirror modifier, but then what I want it to do is rotate it at 45 degrees, but we can see that it's no longer rotating around the center point of the object. So what I'm going to do is go tab, Shift S, cursor to selected, make sure you set the pivot point to 3D cursor, then go back into edit mode, and then we can rotate this like this. So we want to rotate it 45 degrees and apply, but we can see that there's some overlap again, so we can just bisect the other way, flip it, and now we can see we have the object. Now if we apply that, let's just delete these faces, and then we can do Control 1, add the subdivision modifier, and we can just clean up these edges here, just pull these tight like this, and we have a beautiful shape. Look at that, magic. So this, to me, when I was first started out modeling, this shape is very simple and it can be done within 30 seconds. And yet it's so hard to get your head around. How the hell do you model it? How do you make these points join? And it was staring me right in the face with the mirror modifier. It's very, very simple. So what you can then do with that is then take that completely to the next level. So let's rotate this 45 degrees, apply the rotation, then let's add another mirror modifier and bring this out like this. Let's turn on clipping, move this over here so it clips and touches, and then we can just apply that. Then let's add another mirror modifier, and then let's rotate this 90 degrees, and then let's bring this out like this. Again, let's turn on clipping and just apply this. Then let's add another mirror modifier, and then let's just mirror this on the Z-axis and bring this down. And we could just enable bisect for this one so that we don't have to click clipping. And then we have this shape. And then what we want to do is then just add an empty. And then click on this shape, add another mirror, and let's click on this shape here. Then let's rotate this like this. And then let's apply the bisect. Then we get this funny shape. Then let's click on mirror modifier. And then let's add an empty. And then set that as the mirror object. And we can bring this out like this. Then again, let's bisect it. And we get this funny shape. Let's bring this out like this maybe. Okay. And you could just keep going and going and going. And you end up with some very cool, very geometric shapes. And in the end, I ended up with a shape which looked like this. And it's just like an endless maze of pipes. And I think it just looks very, very cool. So yeah, if you're having doubt and you're trying to figure out how to make a geometric, symmetrical object, try bisect, try the mirror tool, and then you could get there. Okay, now that leads me on to the next tool, and that is going to be some data information about the mirror modifier. So let's say you have this object here, and we're going to mirror it, but it's going to be overlapping. So let's make sure that we bisect it. And we can see that we now have a problem that the UVs are going to be symmetrical. And we can actually fix that inside the mirror modifier. So let's go to data. And then we can flip the V-axis. And now we can see that it's no longer mirroring, but it looks off. So what we can do is let's hold down Shift to fine tune it. Then let's bring this over all the way to the point where it's going to join. And there we go. We now have an object which is now mirrored, but the UVs are continuing how they should do, which is super helpful. There's been so many times where I've had an object, I've then applied the mirror modifier, I've gone all the way to the rendering, and then I've forgotten, oh, all the UVs are now mirrored and backwards. So you can fix that inside of here. You can also offset this and play with these UVs here. But in general, these are going to be the things which you're going to need most of the time. Okay, and that's probably where I'm going to leave that today. I think that has probably taught you most of the things about the mirror modifier. I'm sure there's some other things which I've forgotten, and I'm sure people are going to correct me in the comments. But I hope that I've taught you something about this and showed you some very common use cases and given you some cool ideas that you can use going forwards. Don't forget that the mirror modifier is there and doesn't just mirror, it can do many other things. So yeah, thank you for watching. Please do check out iMesh. We have a bunch of freebies that you can download. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I guess I'll see you next week. I seem to be doing them weekly at the moment, so see you next week. Hope maybe.